Hi everyone, thanks for coming. So we have a sign-up sheet at the back, and I'm going to briefly introduce Nick before he comes up and reads, and then we're going to have a brief break, and then he's going to introduce me, and I'm going to come up and read, and then we'll have another small break, and then we'll have an open mic for anyone who wants to read some work of their own. So Nick and I met last year at the annual Wild Poets Spring Workshop, which was here in Gillette. We stayed in touch after that and went on a hike in the Cloud Peak Wilderness back in the fall. We've exchanged many texts, emails, and Instagram posts about poetry and writing in general ever since. We spoke in the high country about hosting an event like this, and I think I can speak for both of us when I say how honored and excited we are to be doing this and how grateful we are that you guys all showed up, and to all of you tuning in online. So now I'll quickly introduce Nick, and he can go up and kick this thing off. So Nicholas Trandal is a U.S. Army veteran, a poet, newspaper journalist, and an outdoorsman. He lives in rural Wyoming with his wife and 3 daughters. He has published 3 poetry collections and a novel, all with Winter Goose Publishing. His poetry collections are Pulling Words, Think of Me, and Bravery, for which Trandal was awarded the 2019 Wyoming Writers Milestone Award. His novel, Good Brave People, is about finding love and belonging in Spanish Basque Country. Trandal is also the poetry editor at the Dewdrop, and he serves as the chairman of the annual Eugene V. Shea National Poetry Contest. Everyone, please welcome my friend, the award-winning poet, Nicholas Trandal.
Okay, let me see if I can get this thing work here. Hello? Good. Thank you for that awesome introduction, Brandon. Like he said, it is an absolute honor to be able to get back in the swing of doing events like these again. They were sorely missed the past couple of years. So I'm going to kick things off quietly. I'm going to dive right in to my first poetry collection called Pulling Words, and with a poem called Heaven Happened Here. There's a warm campfire flickering in the dark air, staining the fresh scent of newly grown woods with a serpentine banner of drifting smoke. I'm sitting around the fire with the ones that I love, passing around a flask of sweet maple whiskey. Our faces are crimson, blemished by the firelight and the spreading warmth of the shared spirits. Heaven happened here, didn't it? That's why we're smiling, why we laugh and love. Thank you. I was born and raised in Wyoming, but part of my childhood was also on the East Coast by the Chesapeake Bay. And this next one I'm going to read it's about some of those memories, not a particular one, but kind of a mishmash of memories that formed this poem. It's called Evening Calling. A table is on the back deck, covered in spread newspapers. A bushel of blue crab is piled, red in shells and claws, caked in fragrant seasoning. The brine of the Chesapeake drifts into the citrus-hued air with the golden summer dusk. All the frogs are croaking down in the viridescent gloom at the far end of the paddock. Fireflies are rising and falling, they're winking and glowing. Yellow-green, evening calling. Thank you. And that's all I'm going to read from that first book. Moving on to my second collection, Think of Me. The poems in Think of Me are a little bit harder than the quietude of Pulling Words. And it's my least reviewed book, Think of Me is, because people seem to like the softer stuff a little bit. I have a soft spot for my middle child here. So it'll open with Still So Wild. I love all of this, all of you, and yet there's a part of me that's still so wild. I could walk deep into the forest gloom and never come back. And it's just a short little intro to the collection. That's the first poem in the book. Thank you. Moving on to trying to get to Abu Nakla. Like Brandon said, I'm a veteran and I served in the Middle East. And at one point after R&R, where I got to come home for a couple weeks in the middle of it, I was on my own trying to get back to my duty station in the Middle East, and I couldn't get a flight on a cargo plane down there for, it seemed like an eternity. And I had one book to read on this little camp I was at with an airstrip in the middle of the Kuwaiti desert. And I read that little book just over and over. And it was a book of Old Norse legends, or Old Norse sagas. So in my mind, oddly, that cold frozen north of Scandinavia got somehow mixed up with the Kuwaiti desert. And this poem was a result of that. It'll make sense in a second. Relaxing on a bunk in an air-conditioned tent on a base in Kuwait. It was summer, hotter than hell. I was in transit trying to return to my duty station in some other country in the Middle East. I've been alone for over a week trying to hitch a ride on a southbound cargo plane to get to Abu Nakla. Still no flight out. Nothing to do but read an old book of Icelandic sagas that I brought with me from back home. Just reading those sagas day after day, waiting. Meanwhile, Bragi looks down from Asgard. Who amongst the Persians is reading the old legends? His wife Iduna kissed him, her sweet breath tasting of apples. Turn away from coarse Midgard, husband, and make love to me. I was still waiting. Odin was wandering the desert, a raven on each shoulder, and one eye a bottomless pit. Maybe I'd never leave that place. Thank you. Those of you that have read some of my work or heard it in the past know that I frequently write about travels and places I go. Stuff like that's incredibly inspiring to me all the time. The food I eat, the people I meet, the things I see. And each book is kind of, you can tell there's like a centerpiece destination that is in the heart of each book. And then Think of Me was a trip to Key West that my wife and kids and I went on to go to the beach, of course, but for me, it was to go to Hemingway's house and, see where one of the places my idol lived at. So this poem I wrote about the tail end of that venture, and it's called Purification. Pines, high mountain air, quiet trails, the gloom of the wood, emptiness. My old soul wanders down to the sand and sea, the near turquoise and the dark heavy blue farther out. Soiled hands gather seawater. I wash the moss from my pale skin with the salt of the sea. I bury my heart on the breezy shore before I return to the high country. Thank you. And now we'll move on to my third poetry collection with Winter Goose Publishing, called Bravery. And like I mentioned about each one of these collections having, a centerpiece destination. This one was also Hemingway related. A friend and I took a road trip to his final resting place so I could leave a flask of whiskey on his grave. And I thought Papa would appreciate it. So I think that's a poem I'll get to at the end of this collection. But we'll open with Garland of Stones, it's a poem about my wife, who is there in the audience, but it's also about my father-in-law who had passed away. It's called Garland of Stones, if I didn't mention it. Sunrise. I'm up early, reading a book and drinking hot coffee. Outside it's pale and cold, a gray kinetic sky broken by rivers of light. For Valentine's Day, I bought jewelry for my wife, who was up until 4 a.m. rearranging the living room and doing laundry because she's been caught in a state of mania since her father suddenly passed away. The necklace is from the 1970s, polished Baltic amber from Europe. I hope that somehow it can center her, slow her down like a garland of stones, so that she has time to see those of us gathered around her like devout worshipers. We, her family members, offer our love to her. I offer my love to her in a string of old chunky amber. The dawn grows quiet and the sky increases its weight. The new gray kitten chirps and runs around the house as if her skin is crawling, as if she's learned from my grieving wife and her frantic nocturnal labor. If I can control this house, my wife thinks to herself. If everything else is out of my hands, at least I can control this house. When she finally came to bed very early in the gray pre-dawn hours, I was angry at her noise and my loneliness that I blamed on her. So I turned my back and faced the wall. I want my husband back, she whispered to me, my back callously turned to her. But I know what she really meant. I want my father back. The sun has risen higher, but it's hidden behind a quilt of low, heavy clouds. Coffee still warms in the pot, waiting for her whenever she awakens. It started snowing, and the flakes are large. Their descent ponderous and peaceful. Thank you. Part of my service in the Army, when I was stateside, I was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso, which, the man I was then and the life I was living then was a high stress and anxiety-filled sort of existence. So El Paso meant something different to me back then. It was a place of fear and responsibility and things like that. It wasn't a place I got to enjoy. So this, like I said, this is from my third poetry collection. So I wrote this one relatively recently, within the last 4 years or so. And it's kind of about what El Paso means to me now at this stage of my life. It's called El Paso. In the life I now have, I think sometimes of the life before. There are just vague thoughts of a place I never called home. Fragments. I think of dusty earth that was maybe red like old blood, maybe brown like leather. The city of pain and apprehension. A decade ago, I lived in El Paso and I slept beside my first wife on a partially deflated air mattress in a small, hot apartment. Her disassociation from me was our constant companion. A baby and a toddler were the glue that held us together for a time. I still need their forgiveness for giving them that heavy role. I was a young soldier at Fort Bliss, busy, dutiful, promising. I had no notion of the different hardships which were soon to come. I'm elsewhere nowadays, healthy, happy, and loved. I'm brave, finally. Those decade-old memories are encircled in so many layers of life that for a long time they were lost. Nothing more than blurred snapshots like improperly developed film. Insubstantial settings, the aforementioned apartment, the Army base and its stresses, and clockwork structures, the inpatient ward on the 14th floor of the hospital. But I began to dig through all that hazy, confusing imagery and put some thought into El Paso. I've begun to peel back the layers so that I can touch my own ancient misery and try to grow a blossom of sunshine, a yellow desert flower. I try to remember good things. I remember sometimes imagining that I was in a vibrant Mexican city instead of the western corner of Texas, imagining I'd escaped my life and made a home in a country that I wasn't born in. Like Allen Ginsberg or Jack Kerouac, I would have become inspired, I think, in the vestiges of old Mexico. I drink good tequila and eat steak, occasionally enjoy the bloody spectacle of a bullfight in the hot sun, roaring with the crowds. I remember a dust of snow in January, up in the Franklin Mountains, weather cold enough for a warm coat. And in the summertime, I remember the tall palm trees around a hotel swimming pool. I remember all the good, moral Catholics gathered at their old gorgeous churches on warm Sunday mornings. I remember being happy for them that they still believed in something, and their doctrine and ritual, and their trusted priest that placed the body and blood of Christ upon their eager tongues. I remember the sunsets that were lit up like the warm palette of a painter over the desert and brown mountains, over that strange city within which I lived, but was too busy and full of fear to properly know. I also remember gazing out at night over El Paso and across the Rio Grande to the alluring chaos of Juarez. Its streetlights glittered like moonlit shards. Those untidy shards were actually poetry, though tragically I didn't know it then. But I know it now. Thank you. All right, as I alluded to, this one is dedicated to Ernest Hemingway. It's called Whiskey and Stone, and it begins with an inscription from Hemingway to his friend A.E. Hotchner. Every man's life ends the same way. It is only in the details of how he lived and how he died that distinguish one man from another. In the diminishing dusk, his name is inscribed on a heavy slab of stone between two old pines. Beneath my feet are roots, bones, and earth. Perfect silence. Fallen pine needles rest upon the sturdy name alongside other offerings, coins, pens, and bottles of liquor and wine. I kneel and place my hand upon the honesty of the name, the stark reality of it. I whisper my thanks and pour honey whiskey into the dark, thirsty earth, leaving behind my flask half full as a gift. Thank you. As we speak, I have a fourth poetry manuscript called Imperium, which I'm shopping around to publishers. So I'm going to read a few poems from that. And the poems I'm going to read have been published in journals, which I'm going to read from, but eventually they'll be gathered into a manuscript. And as you'll see, my poems, my published work has been building towards something. And you'll see these poems have sort of a different tone than my prior work. So we will start with a poem called Black Knife, and it's another Middle East poem. It also begins with an inscription by Leo Tolstoy in his work, The Kingdom of God is Within You. And can he, by taking his share of service in the army, prepare himself to murder men and even actually murder them? Indistinct, the sun wavers in the quiet desert haze above Abu Nakhla. My breath comes quick and hard as I sprint alone across the expanse of pale sand and stone. Dust hangs in the air. From the old Toyota pickup, the brakes suddenly between me and the safety of the gate. A young, skinny Arab man leaps from the back of the truck, something indiscernible held in his hands. A knife, sharp and black, is clutched in my white-knuckled fist. Instinct carries me, violent and empty, from one booted footfall to the next. Thank you. And that poem is available in the James Dickey Review, the 2020 edition. And just recently, I was fortunate enough to have a couple poems featured in an anthology called The Mountain. And I'm an avid hiker and backpacker, so being a part of this is an anthology of mountain poems from Middle Creek Publishing out of Colorado. And I was honored to be a part of it. So first I'll read a poem called One True Vision. And this poem addresses a solo backpacking trip I went on last summer in the Cloud Peak Wilderness on a different trip than Brandon and I went on. But I went on my own and it was a little bit dangerous than I was counting on. And this poem kind of tackles humility. She seems to say sternly, "Why came ye here before your time? This ground is not prepared for you." That's a quote from Henry David Thoreau in The Maine Woods. I have taken the pilgrim's path high into the wild heart of the earth. I have labored into the mountains, suffered for the answer, for truth. In solitude, I do not find the answer. I don't find truth to be a silent, wise man relaxed on a throne of stone with words of peace and revelation. Truth is wild. Truth is angry. Truth is the alpine thunderstorm at 12,000 feet as I cower in fear and shiver in misery in the cold driving rain. The high granite ramparts of time's rugged architecture leaning overhead like the high walls of Troy. It is the three nearby bull moose watching me with grim suspicion, like dark mountain saints, the blue lightning flashing in their eyes and their wide antlers spread like hands, raised to the storm in supplication. In this place where man should never go, the old wild gods beat their drums and chant their unnoble words into the thin mountain sky, and I am filled with dread and awe. I am humbled by the truth. Thank you. Okay, and I'm not sure what our time is at, but this will be my final poem, which is the largest one that I possibly wrote ever. So it's a lengthy one, and it's called Karen. Not Karen like the name. I was worried about reading that out loud, but Karen is, a trail marker, a stack of stones, old Scottish word. Stone upon stone. Some sacred place important to someone long gone. Stone upon stone. A steep march away from the earth. We carry significance into the sky like pilgrims of firmament. Trail marker, stone upon stone. The way is clear. Keep your eyes ahead, watchful for what looms around the bend. The swiftly approaching storm crackles with amethyst lightning like fractures in the sky, like when I was wandering the wilderness and had to take cover beneath an old wayward pine as a storm raged. Pines, dark and tall like solemn primordial druids, their roots knotted around moss-speckled granite boulders, shelter beneath them to wait out the wind and the rain. When it's over, emerge. Walk among the pines in quiet magnificence. Follow, 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 stone upon stone. In my dream, there was a forest of cairns like there was beside the sea at the sandy foot of Aquina. Those cliffs of flesh and bone that towered like a shore queen above the corpse of a headless seal, an empty syringe, and my beloved, jubilant in the brassy autumn light. We stacked stones of our own among the innumerable already stacked there. Our hands wiped sand on our sweaters, and we smiled in the salty wind. Long ago, the Wampanoag wives watched the sea at Aquina for their husbands to return from hunting for whales out in the dark, vast blue. There had been no cairns then stacked by pale colonial hands, but there had been worry and prayers to the spirits. There had been love and hope and sadness and loss, stone upon stone, stone upon stone. The gray, windy dawn leaves red, gold, brown. There could be music, something with dramatic strings or the rustic twang of bluegrass or the elegance of Spanish guitar. I stand against the wind like a pilgrim lost in thought, wrapped in an old quilt and holding a mug of something hot. I also hold so much fear, but it's too large for my hands. The trail is lost. There is no marker to direct cautious steps. There are no sacred places. Branches marred and worm-like pestilence shudder in the wind. A flock of autumn leaves tumbles across the sky. There is nothing permanent, nothing sacrilege, and nothing liberated. Stone upon stone, lost. I think of the animal man that simple Canadian woodsman Henry David Thoreau was so fond of. Thoreau said the animal man was cousin to the pine and rock. When a wise man asked that simple woodsman if he would like to see the world change, the animal man answered, "No, I like it well enough." What audacity and ingenuity to be satisfied with anything. Stone upon stone, skyward, progress as risks, simplify, simplify. Animal man, divine man, where is the trail marker to guide my way between these paths? Which path is the beaten one? Stone upon stone, higher. Adventure, simplicity, liberty, love, discovery, wild and free. Falling away down the mountain, reaching for God through the thickening fog. My fingertips find the roughness of bark. Saints, speak to me, guide me. Stone upon stone. Leaves blowing from the branches. A light rain starts. Wild, wild, wild. Stone upon stone. I had climbed toward God, but like any man fell, and still falling, even still. There were paths wandering toward Aspens in Utah for a heart full of wonderment, toward the Cloud Peak wilderness for a soul full of silence, toward a shrine in Ohio for my own American pilgrimage, to the faraway Camino de Santiago that crosses Spain like a holy scar, toward my painful reddened star, my personally historic Mars, vicious and beautiful El Paso. But all those pathways have been broken. There is no way forward. It's getting colder, and I'm as scared now as I've ever been. Where are they, the stacked stones? Where are the guides? Where are the saints? Where is the loving flow of God that a carpenter from Nazareth said was within each of us? Where are the whalers in that cobalt Atlantic wilderness? Where is that Homeric woodsman and his honest simplicity that Thoreau admired and possibly loved? That animal man that was cousin to the pine and rock? Where is Tolstoy's divine man filling up with more and more life as he grows ever closer to God? Stone upon stone, stone upon stone, a silence, a breeze carrying wood smoke. The distant song of a bird echoes through the pines. A crow in an empty tree, vultures turning overhead like dark angels against the sapphire sky. A magpie flies across an empty dirt road. Solitude. Hell breath on a darkening day. A burden of fear standing alone. Stone upon stone, stone upon stone. Thank you. So at this point, we'll take a small 5-minute break before I introduce Brandon McQuaid. Thank you.
Wrote up that sometimes.
Testing. Okay. Now it is my extreme pleasure to introduce my friend, poet Brandon McQuade, who is a Gillette resident by way of Ireland, by way of Canada. I'm sure I'm missing a few places too, but he's a well-traveled man. He had mentioned, we met at the most recent Wild Poets Conference, which is last year in Gillette here, and we hit it off and have been sounding boards for each other's poems ever since, texting daily lines. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Does this work? He is published in various journals and anthologies. He does have a chapbook available called Bleeding Heart. He's got a forthcoming full-length poetry collection called Mango Seed, which is being published by Scurf P Publishing, which is in South Dakota. So he's got a contract with them coming up soon, hopefully, because I devoured Bleeding Heart and I'm ready for more of his work. So another thing about Brandon is I believe he runs, if not the only, then it's one of the only independent literary journals in the state of Wyoming, the Duckhead Journal, which it's a quarterly that has had 2 editions so far, publishing a wide variety of poets from, not just even American poets, but I think he's had poets from Ireland and Canada. And but there is a lot of Wyoming voices in there, so I encourage you to check out his journal, the Duckhead Journal, and if you are a poet, submit to it for the spring edition, which is coming. So it is my pleasure to introduce Brandon McQuade.
Thanks a lot, Nick, for that introduction. So, as Nick mentioned, I have published a chapbook, Bleeding Heart. I'll read a few poems from it, and then a few poems from my forthcoming collection, Mango Seed, and then I'll read a couple from just kind of work in progress that I have that aren't published anywhere. So, the first poem I'm going to read is called Fledgling. I actually read this last year at the Wild Poets Conference. It has since been shortlisted for the October Project Poetry Prize. So here's Fledgling. I dream in the bed you were conceived of the barn swallows outside our door, their precarious nest cup hanging from the corner, a handful of mud and sticks in the beams. Inside, eggs are hatching. The chicks are finding themselves, their eyes and legs coming down to earth like the post-coital search for clothes and towel. I realize with my ear against her navel, listening to your mother like the mouth of a seashell, that the moment I cut the umbilical cord, my hands are forever responsible for your separation. Your hand and mouth will reach for your mother's breast as the fledgling foot escapes the nest. Thank you. This next poem is called Alzheimer's. It's dedicated to the memory of my grandfather. He was never clinically diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but his memory faded towards the end in his final years, and we all sort of suspected that he had it. So this is Alzheimer's. My grandfather stares at the flames in the propane fireplace, his palm wrapped loosely around a warm cup of coffee. Barefoot, he bears the soles of his feet to the cold carpet, the colder floorboards underneath. His eyes are deep blue, his hair a deeper gray. He stares at his reflection like the reflection of a ghost. He remembers the farm, wheat fields, and cold winters, forgets the names and faces of his children. This next poem is called The Sea Field. The title is actually borrowed from one of my favorite Irish poets. His name's Tom French. His most recent poetry collection, which was published in 2018, I believe, was titled The Seafield. There was no poem of that name in the collection, but there was a line in one of the poems. This isn't ever the line, but it's just the title itself. I thought it was really fitting for this poem, so it's sort of a borrowed title, as I call it. And that poetry collection sort of informed and inspired this poem to a certain extent. And a Claude Monet painting, Chemin dans les Blés à Pourville, which I have above my writing desk at home, also informed some of the imagery in this poem. And the pandemic as well. I was living in San Antonio at the height of it, as you could call it, I suppose. And the first person, as I know, or at least the way that it was announced, or the news article, the way it read was the first person under the age of 18 to die as a result of complications due to COVID-19 in the city of San Antonio was just recently in the news. And then my son was born and I wasn't able to go to the appointments because only one parent was allowed in. So I was actually sitting in the car and scribbling the notes that became this poem while my wife was at my son's, I believe, 3-month appointment and getting shots and vaccinations and things like that. So that's sort of just some background information into this poem, which is, I believe it's the longest poem in this chapbook. So it's called The Seafield. The morning birds are telling us something, singing high over our neighborly streets, drowning out the cicada's painful screams. They are singing for the unnamed, genderless dead, the youthfulness taken on the brink of adulthood. In the upstairs office where I write, a painting hangs above the bookcase, a framed Claude Monet we found at Goodwill, Chemin dans les Blés à Pourville. It is yellow gold and green blue, a path through a field of wheat that leads to the cold blue sea. Do you remember art, paintings, music, poetry? What do the dead remember? Your body will soon be washed clean, your skin and veins cold and blue as the sea in this painting. We washed the dead one last time, then dressed them in the finest suit and tie we can find, or the finest blouse and pants. I have always wondered, why do the dead need clothes and footwear, especially those who are cremated? We dress them up like they are going somewhere, dead and on fire and underground. We dress them up like they are attending their own funeral. We cover the blemishes of death with makeup to make them look presentable one last time, for their loved ones to see them one last time. We prepare them with love and care and due diligence to meet respectably the faces they will meet in the afterlife. But your loved ones do not get to see you die like this. Only the doctors and the nurses and the mortician and your reflection in the bathroom mirror. Your loved ones watch you die from a distance, behind a mask, through hospital glass, a cold door or window. The birds fill our ears with songs of mourning. The people of the neighborhood mourn behind their masks on the hot Texas summer morning of your death. Birds have gathered on wires, rooftops and treetops to sing down through branches and chimneys with no regard for their own safety. They do not practice social distancing. But they sing for joy, long and loud. They sing joy and praise and love, and they welcome the cloud cover, a cold shower in this drought, to wash and cool our warm bodies like your body on its deathbed. The cool steel table where they make you look presentable, the cold waters of the sea at the end of the wheat field. Thank you. So I'm going to close this collection with the last poem, the poem that closes it. It's called Mango Seed. So this poem actually closes my chapbook and opens, so it felt like it was a jumping off point for me to a certain extent to some new work. So even though I closed this chapbook with it, my collection will open with this, and that'll be the title of my collection as well, Mango Seed. Seated in his high chair like a king, my wife hands our son a mango seed. He starts in on it, gnawing at the skin with his 6 new razor-sharp teeth. The skin of the mango never wears away, not completely, no matter how hard he tries. I remember my wife telling me our energy must go somewhere when we die. And then I think of the mango seed again, how I had never believed in God or the soul or the afterlife. But if there is one, it must be like the skin of the mango seed, the last bit of energy clinging to our dead bodies. Thank you. So as I mentioned, the next 4 poems will be from my forthcoming collection with Scurfy Publishing called Mango Seed. This first poem was called Push, and it was actually inspired by Jim Harrison's poem Zona, which Nick recited when we were on our hike in the Cloud Peak Wilderness. A month or so later, after our first snowfall, I wrote this poem. Push. Behind the frosted, weather-stained windows are my wife and sons, all my care. A fresh pot of coffee and soup or chili. I pull my hat down over my ears, throw a coat over my shoulders, return the blade of the shovel to the earth, and push. Thank you. This next poem is called The Hummingbird. I wrote this one while living in San Antonio. As I mentioned before, my grandparents had recently passed. And I was thinking about them as I watched a hummingbird hovering around our neighbor's sunflowers in his backyard. The hummingbird. That everyone we have ever loved will die does not concern the hummingbird, flying like a vibration back and forth between the fence and flowers. Go gently, sweet hummingbird, back and forth between the fence and flowers. Thank you. This next poem is called Returning to Church. It's written in memory of my grandmother, kind of similar. Oh, I wrote her around the same time, actually, that I wrote the poem that I read earlier called Alzheimer's. I wrote this one around the same time, but it just didn't make it into the chapbook because I hadn't quite finished editing it. So it's going to be in the collection, and it's in memory of my grandmother, Yvonne McQuaid, and written after Michael Dickman. Returning to Church. The faded teddy bear art on her living room wall, the texture under the frame like an ugly Christmas sweater, only not ugly, but quaint, and somehow vaguely religious. It was something to do with the patchwork, like a quilt my grandmother's hands had woven. Something about her hardened fingertips, age-worn, kitchen calloused, immune to stove burn and needle prick. Somehow this framed teddy bear was impossibly Catholic, and I knew I had to have it. I could barely step foot into St. Augustine's for my grandmother's funeral, the eyes of biblical figures burning through me, stained glass and sculpture screaming dismissal. I sat between my brothers, their hands holding the hands of girlfriend and wife, my own folded, resting at my thighs, snug as the seat back prayer books, while the organ cried like a tired piano. I had almost forgotten returning to church, the promises they make in singing voices, pedals and keys, or not singing at all, but speaking, monotonous, deep and emotionless, only this time was different. The priest questioned his promises, knowing only that she would be missed by family, community, and church. And if you listened hard enough, you could hear him weeping through the lump in his throat. Thank you. next one is called Treading Water, and it was inspired by the year I lived in Dublin, Ireland, particularly my first and only swim in the Irish Sea. Treading water. Treading water in the Irish Sea, I feel the tide shifting, the tug and pull of sea and shore at my extremities. When I die, I will go willingly into the fire, take my ashes and bury me in delicate, masculine water. Let me float down the brook I walked as a boy, searching for beaver dams. Take my body back to where it all began. Let my wife and sons read the poems I have written, keeping them like bottled memories. Let us live together in them for as long as we can, cheating time and staying together as long as we can. Empty my body of ash into the stream. Let me enter this planet again, surrounded by loved ones and water, alone, naked, and afraid. Thank you. So the following few poems are from a new project that is currently titled If the Soul Could Speak. I've compiled these poems along with a handful of others into a chapbook. Right now, I've sent it to a few publishers because I'm thinking maybe I'll publish a chapbook in the near future, like shortly after Mango Seed, and then someday a few of these chapbook poems could survive and enter into a manuscript, or if the chapbook thing doesn't work out, I'll kind of keep writing and then make another full-length collection. So this first poem, actually all of these poems in If the Soul Could Speak are, they're all inspired in one way or another by Jim Harrison's poetry, which earlier I said Nick had recited a poem, Zona, when we were hiking in the Cloud Peak Wilderness. And since then I've read most of Jim Harrison's collected work. And all these poems, like I said, are inspired by something he's written, or I wrote it a few days later after sort of letting his poetry sink in. And so I think they're all, in one way or another, you could say they're inspired by him. So this first poem was called Patience. I stopped by the fishing lake along the grassy shoreline to watch a great blue heron wait patiently for something that never came. His legs were half submerged, his head cocked slightly to the left. Only time could stand so still. Geese flew over us. The sun dipped its head behind a cloud, and we stood there with nothing but wind and water between us, like strangers in a train station, stopping forever before passing each other. The station painted the bleak gray of winter. I thought I saw him flinch. I waited with patience for him to take flight, turn his head, take a step, or stab at the surface for a fish. When I couldn't wait any longer, I turned away from him and walked on toward the sun. I watched its tired light filter through the trees, and I thought about how lonely it must be to be one in a galaxy of stars, the closest to Earth, yet still so far away. I looked back at the great blue heron, and I imagined his head turning, watching me walk away under a cold gray sky, waiting for me to disappear from his field of view, like the glimmering scales of a fish in murky water, an unknown, nameless star somewhere in the distance. Thank you. This next one's called The Middle of the Night, and it was written after Jim Harrison's poem, Mother Night. The middle of the night. Bright light is unbearable in the middle of the night. We shrug it off, turn and hide our eyes like indifferent shoulders. The world only makes sense in the middle of the night, in small doses. We understand from experience and instinct how to find the things we need, the way a breastfed baby finds its mother's nipple without the ability to see. The middle of the night is a transitional phase, a stage between wakefulness and sleep. a plane of existence between the dead and the living. You can see cartoons flashing on the pitch black television screen in the middle of the night. You can remember all the words to Goodnight Moon. You can remember the moon waning, its white light fading like decaying teeth. But your middle name, where you work, and what you do never enters the equation. These details never trigger, never reach the synapses in the enigma that is your brain. The darkest hours are the longest in the middle of the night, sinking into the living room couch when the stars don't shine and the cosmos is an endlessly vast wasteland of empty darkness. The God of darkness lives here in the middle of the night, and he never rests, only existing in absence. No human being is awake at this hour, except the coal miner returning from his night shift, the lights of his lifted truck like sunbeams announcing the arrival of morning. The coffee pot is switched on, a lighter shade of darkness sets in. A flock of geese honk overhead and begin to make their descent over the house upon the lake. This is all the confirmation I need that the middle of the night has ended, that morning will come and another day begin. I plan on timing this. Am I okay for time or am I over? I could read two more or one more. Okay. So this next poem is called Sparrow. Winter tore another hole in the body of the tree. The immeasurable weight of the wind and snow wears on us all, except the sparrow. Morning light filters in, heavy on the branch that holds the sparrow like an open hand. Anyone who is anyone has flown south by now. The sparrow nudges aside ice and snow, shakes off the cold, and takes flight. The neighborhood cat lies dead in the road, its eyes like marbles, lifeless, artificial, like the eyes of a doll. Lost in a sea of white, he must have stopped to rest for a moment and died from the cold. Nothing but frozen fur under a sheet of snow. He stares blankly from his bony sockets into the crystal abyss of another cruel winter. Everything is dead or slow. Even the sky has frozen over. The sparrow chips loudly, flitting between a hole in the snow-covered roof and the branches above. Thank you. So this will be the last poem I'll read. It's called, I just want to thank everyone again for coming and for tuning in. This one's called Small Gods. The god of weather spits snow sideways through yellow teeth. A modern day Odin, his weathered face wrinkled, broken in as a leather saddle on a stubborn horse. Not to mention his one good eye, the other made of glass, his pupil and iris scrambled in their socket like albumin and yolk in a bowl, or his infinite wisdom. Jim Harrison's words remind me constantly how as a child I roamed freely through the woods, and now I am tethered like a leaf to a tree to my responsibilities. Someday I'll go back and visit the distant places of my past. Someday I'll go back. I wonder if the gods of my youth still exist. I'm trying not to lose faith. Thank you. Is this on again? We'll have a brief break, and then anyone who has signed up, or even if you haven't, I don't think we've had very many, but even if you haven't signed up, I'm sure we'll have the time for you to read. So in 5 or 10 minutes, we'll start the open mic. Thank you.